The advertisement in the San Francisco Chronicle cost Owen $3 he could barely spare, but loneliness had become a burden heavier than any debt. He sat at the rough-hewn table in his ranch house outside Jamestown, California, staring at the words he had penned 2 weeks prior, wondering if any woman would ever respond to such a desperate plea from a stranger. It was April 1876, and the spring rains had turned the grasslands emerald green, but Owen James felt nothing but gray. His ranch stretched across 200 acres of rolling hills. His cattle numbered nearly 300 head, and his barn stood sturdy against the Sierra Nevada foothills. Yet every evening he returned to an empty house that echoed with his footsteps, and every morning he woke to silence so complete it felt like drowning. At 29 years old, he had built something substantial with his own 2 hands, but there was no one to share it with, no voice to break the monotony of wind through the pines and the lowing of cattle in distant pastures. The letter arrived on a Thursday, delivered by the postal rider who made the circuit from Jamestown twice weekly. Owen's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal, hardly daring to hope. The handwriting was neat and elegant, each letter carefully formed. Dear Mr. James, I read your advertisement with great interest. My name is Eleanor Davies, and I am 24 years old, currently residing in Sacramento. I have been teaching school for the past 3 years, but circumstances have led me to seek a new situation. I am of good character, able to cook and manage a household, and I am not afraid of hard work. If you are still seeking companionship, I would be willing to travel to Jamestown to meet you and discuss the possibility of marriage. I have enclosed a small photograph so you might know my appearance. I hope this letter finds you well. Respectfully yours, Eleanor Davies. Owen studied the small tintype photograph that had fallen from the envelope. The woman who looked back at him had dark hair pulled back from a face that was handsome rather than pretty, with intelligent eyes and a serious expression. There was something in her gaze that suggested strength and determination. His heart hammered in his chest as he read the letter 3 more times, searching for any hint of insincerity or deception. He wrote back that same evening, his words careful and honest. He described his ranch, his daily routine, the isolation of the location, and his hopes for finding a partner who might build a life with him. He did not exaggerate his circumstances or paint false pictures of romance. He simply told the truth and invited her to come to Jamestown, promising to pay for her stage fare and to provide her with lodging at the hotel in town if she wished to meet him before making any decisions. Eleanor's response came swiftly. She would arrive in 3 weeks' time on the afternoon stage. Those 3 weeks passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Owen cleaned his house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that had not seen a proper washing in months. He repaired the loose shutter on the bedroom window, replaced the cracked pane of glass in the kitchen, and even attempted to sew new curtains from fabric he purchased in town, though the results were lopsided and uneven. His foreman, a grizzled cowhand named Pete who had worked the ranch for 5 years, watched these preparations with barely concealed amusement. "Never seen you this worked up over anything, boss," Pete observed as Owen whitewashed the fence around the house for the second time. "You sure this woman is even going to show?" "She said she would," Owen replied, his jaw set with determination. "I believe her. Women are peculiar creatures," Pete said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "They say one thing and mean another half the time." But Pete did not understand the tone of Eleanor's letters, which had continued to arrive weekly. She wrote about her life in Sacramento, about the students she taught, and the books she loved to read. She asked thoughtful questions about his cattle operation and the challenges of ranching. She mentioned that she had been raised on a small farm in Missouri before her family moved west after the war, so she understood the rhythms of agricultural life. There was no coyness in her correspondence, no false modesty or manipulation. She wrote like someone seeking a genuine partnership, and that honesty gave Owen hope he had not felt in years. The day of her arrival dawned clear and warm, the California sunshine turning the golden hills to amber. Owen dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit he had not worn since his mother's funeral 4 years prior. It hung a bit loose on his frame now, testament to too many meals of beans and hardtack eaten alone. He hitched his horse to the wagon and drove the 5 miles into Jamestown, arriving at the stage depot a full hour before the coach was due. Jamestown bustled with activity that afternoon. The mining boom that had built the town in the 1850s had settled into steady industry, and the streets were lined with respectable businesses rather than the rough saloons and gambling halls of the early gold rush days. Owen stood outside the Wells Fargo office, his hat in his hands, watching the road that wound down from the mountains. The stage appeared precisely on time, dust billowing from its wheels as the driver pulled the horses to a halt. 3 passengers disembarked. A mining engineer Owen recognized from previous visits, an elderly man who was met by a younger couple. And then Eleanor Davies stepped down, and Owen's breath caught in his throat. She was taller than he had expected, nearly matching his own height of 6 feet. She wore a practical traveling dress of dark blue calico, and her hair was pinned beneath a modest bonnet. She carried a single carpet bag and looked around the busy street with an expression of calm observation rather than nervousness. When her eyes found his, she smiled, and it transformed her entire face from serious to warm. "Mr. James," she asked, approaching him directly. "Miss Davies." He fumbled with his hat, nearly dropping it. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." "Long but not unpleasant," she replied. Her voice was clear and steady, with a hint of Missouri still coloring her vowels. The mountain scenery was quite beautiful. They stood facing each other for a moment, 2 strangers who had agreed through written words to consider binding their lives together. Up close, Owen could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the sunburn on her nose, the calluses on her hands when she adjusted her grip on the carpet bag. These were not the hands of a delicate city woman, but of someone accustomed to work. "I've taken a room for you at the hotel," Owen said, gesturing down the street. "I thought you might want to rest and refresh yourself. We could have supper this evening and talk if that suits you." "That would be fine," Eleanor agreed, "though I confess I am more curious than tired." "Would you show me your ranch? I would like to see where you live and work before we discuss anything further." Her directness caught him off guard, but he found it refreshing. "Of course. The wagon is just here." He helped her up onto the bench seat, and they drove out of town through the spring afternoon. At first, they traveled in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Eleanor looked around with obvious interest, taking in the landscape of rolling hills dotted with oak trees and the distant purple line of the Sierra Nevada mountains. "How long have you owned the ranch?" she asked as they turned onto the dirt road that led to his property. 8 years, Owen replied. "I came out from Ohio after my parents died, used my inheritance to buy the land and start a herd. It has grown slowly but steadily since then." "That must have taken considerable skill and determination," Eleanor observed. "Building something from nothing in this country. It took more stubbornness than skill," Owen admitted, "and a good deal of luck with the weather and cattle prices. There have been lean years, but you persevered." "I did not have much choice. This ranch is all I have, all I am." Eleanor turned to look at him directly, her gaze searching. "I doubt that is true, Mr. James. A ranch is property and livestock. A man is much more than his possessions." Before Owen could formulate a response to that surprisingly philosophical observation, they crested the final hill, and his ranch spread out before them. The house sat in a small valley, protected from the worst winds by the surrounding hills. The barns and corrals were well maintained, and his cattle grazed across the visible pastures. A creek ran through the property, lined with willows that were just beginning to leaf out in pale green. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, studying everything. "It is beautiful," she finally said, and Owen heard genuine appreciation in her voice. "Isolated, certainly, but beautiful." "The isolation is the hardest part," Owen admitted as he guided the wagon down toward the house. "Town is 5 miles, and in winter storms, sometimes you cannot get there for weeks at a time. The work is constant and often difficult. It is not an easy life for anyone, but especially for a woman accustomed to town living and society." "I have never been much for society," Eleanor replied. "And I told you in my letters that I grew up on a farm. I understand what the work entails." They reached the house, and Owen helped her down from the wagon. He felt self-conscious as she examined the exterior, seeing it through her eyes. It was solidly built but plain, a simple rectangular structure with a covered porch across the front. The crooked curtains hung in the windows, evidence of his clumsy attempts at homemaking. "May I see inside?" Eleanor asked. Owen led her through the front door into the main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and his few pieces of furniture looked spare in the generous space. Everything was scrupulously clean, but there were no decorative touches, no sense of warmth or personality. Eleanor walked slowly through the room, running her fingers along the edge of the table, examining the fireplace, peering through the doorways to the 2 bedrooms that opened off the main space. Owen followed her, trying to see his home through her eyes and finding it wanting. "You keep a neat house," she commented, "but it feels empty. Like no one truly lives here, only exists." Her words struck uncomfortably close to the truth. "I suppose I have never had much talent for making a place feel like home," Owen said quietly. "That was my mother's gift, not mine." Eleanor turned to face him, and her expression was thoughtful rather than judgmental. "May I ask you something directly, Mr. James? Please do. Why did you place that advertisement? What is it you truly want from a wife?" Owen took a breath, considering his answer carefully. They stood in the middle of his empty house, 2 people who barely knew each other, discussing the most intimate aspects of their future. He could give her pleasant platitudes, but Eleanor Davies did not seem like a woman who would appreciate falsehood. "I want someone to share my life with," he said finally. "Not just to cook my meals or wash my clothes, though those things would be welcome. I want conversation at the end of a long day. I want someone to make plans with, to build something with. I want children eventually, if God wills it. I want to stop being so alone that some days I forget the sound of my own voice." He paused, feeling heat rise to his face. "That probably sounds pathetic." "No," Eleanor said softly. "It sounds honest and lonely. I understand loneliness, Mr. James." "Owen," he corrected. "If we are being honest with each other, we should use our given names." "Owen," she repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "Then you must call me Eleanor, and I should tell you why I answered your advertisement." She moved to the window, looking out over the ranch. "I have been teaching school in Sacramento for 3 years. It is respectable work, but the pay is minimal, and I have been living in a boarding house with 5 other women. 3 months ago, the headmaster made it clear that he expected me to accept his advances in exchange for keeping my position. When I refused, he began making my life difficult, criticizing my teaching methods, giving me the worst students, cutting my pay for invented infractions. Owen felt anger rise in his chest. That is unconscionable. It is, but it is also common, Eleanor replied matter-of-factly. I could have reported him to the school board, but they are all men, all his friends. I would not have been believed. So I began looking for other options. I have no family left. My parents died of cholera 5 years ago, and I have no siblings. I could try to find another teaching position, but without references from my current school, that would be nearly impossible. And I am tired, Owen. Tired of living on scraps, tired of fighting to maintain my dignity, tired of being alone and vulnerable with no one to turn to for help. She turned back to face him, and her eyes were fierce. I do not need a husband to rescue me. I am capable of taking care of myself, but I want a partner. I want to build something meaningful with someone. I want the security of knowing I have a home that no one can take from me on a whim. And I want children, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving each day. So when I read your advertisement with its honest simplicity, I thought perhaps we might want the same things. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes in the air between them. Owen looked at this remarkable woman who had traveled here to meet a stranger, who spoke with such candor about her circumstances and desires. He thought about the content of her letters, the intelligence and humor that had shone through her words. He thought about returning to this empty house alone after taking her back to town. I think we do want the same things, he said. But this is a tremendous decision, Eleanor. We have only just met. Perhaps you should stay in town for a few days, and we could spend time together, get to know each other better before making any commitments. That is a sensible suggestion, Eleanor agreed. Though I confess I feel like I already know you somewhat from your letters. You write like you speak, with careful honesty. It is a rare quality. Over the next 5 days, Owen called on Eleanor at the hotel every morning and spent the daylight hours showing her around the area. They walked through Jamestown, and he introduced her to the shopkeepers and townspeople. They drove out to various parts of his ranch, and he explained his operations while she asked surprisingly detailed questions about cattle management and land use. They shared meals at the hotel dining room and sat on the porch in the evening talking until the stars came out. Owen found himself telling Eleanor things he had never spoken aloud to anyone. About his childhood in Ohio, about his father's stern discipline and his mother's quiet kindness. About the war years, though he had been too young to fight, and how it had changed everything. About coming west with such hope and determination, and the gradual wearing away of that youthful optimism into the steady grind of daily survival. About the small victories and large disappointments of building his ranch. About winter nights when the loneliness felt like a physical ache in his chest. Eleanor listened without judgment, asking questions that showed she understood the deeper meanings beneath his words, and she shared her own stories. About growing up on a Missouri farm, about the excitement and terror of the journey west in a wagon train when she was 15. About losing her parents and suddenly being alone in Sacramento with $50 and a trunk of clothes. About discovering she had a talent for teaching and the satisfaction of watching children learn. About the gradual realization that her independence, which she valued so highly, came with a price of perpetual insecurity. On the 5th evening, as they sat on the hotel porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson, Owen reached over and took Eleanor's hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her in and out of the wagon, and he felt her fingers tighten around his. "I would like you to marry me, Eleanor," he said quietly. "Not because either of us is desperate, but because I believe we could build a good life together. I cannot promise you wealth or luxury, but I can promise you respect and partnership and the best of whatever I have to give. I think we could make each other less lonely and perhaps even happy." Eleanor looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "I would like that too," she said. "I believe we are well suited, Owen. We are both practical people who understand the value of honesty and hard work. We have both known loss and loneliness, and I think we could learn to love each other given time." "You do not love me now," Owen said, wanting to be clear about their understanding. "No," Eleanor agreed without hesitation, "and you do not love me. But I like you very much, and I respect you, and I feel comfortable in your presence. That seems like a good foundation to build upon, better than the passionate infatuation that burns hot and fast and leaves nothing but ash." Owen smiled, a genuine expression that felt unfamiliar on his face. "When did you become so wise about such things?" "From observation and rating," Eleanor replied. "I have seen many marriages, both good and bad. The best ones seem to be partnerships built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than romantic fantasy." They were married 3 days later by the Justice of the Peace in Jamestown, with Pete and the hotel owner's wife standing as witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple dress of gray silk that she had purchased from the dressmaker in town, and Owen wore his suit. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, but when Owen slipped the gold band onto Eleanor's finger and kissed her for the first time, he felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with hope. They drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon, and this time when Eleanor walked into the house, it was as his wife, mistress of her own home. She moved through the rooms with purpose now rather than mere curiosity, mentally cataloging what was needed and what could be improved. That first night was awkward, as first nights often are between two people who have married for practical reasons rather than love. They were considerate with each other, gentle and patient, and if there were no fireworks of passion, there was also no disappointment. They were beginning a journey together, and both understood that intimacy, like affection, would develop over time. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn and had coffee brewing when Owen came in from checking the barn. He stopped in the doorway, momentarily disoriented by the smell of coffee and the sight of another person in his kitchen. Eleanor stood at the stove wearing one of his mother's old aprons that she had found in a trunk, her hair in a long braid down her back. "Good morning," she said, pouring him a cup. "I hope you do not mind that I went through some of the trunks in the spare room. I was looking for kitchen things." "My mother's belongings," Owen said, taking the coffee gratefully. "I have not been able to bring myself to sort through them." "Please use whatever you find useful." Eleanor nodded. She had excellent taste in cookware. "I found a Dutch oven and some good cast iron skillets. With your permission, I would like to go through everything and organize the household properly. It will give me something to do while you are working, and I need to understand what we have and what we need." Thus began their new routine. Owen rose early and went about his ranch work while Eleanor set about transforming the house into a proper home. She proved to be a woman of remarkable energy and capability. Within a week, she had cleaned and organized every corner of the house, brought out linens and dishes from the trunks, and even managed to hang her own curtains that actually hung straight. She established a garden plot near the house and planted vegetable seeds she purchased in town. She learned to cook on the temperamental stove and filled the house with smells that made Owen hurry back from the range at mealtimes. But more than the physical improvements, Eleanor brought life to the ranch. She talked to Owen over breakfast about her plans for the day and asked about his work. She walked out to find him in the afternoons, bringing water or coffee, and stood beside him while he mended fences or doctored cattle, asking questions and offering observations. In the evenings, they sat together, and she read aloud from books while he worked on tack or tools, her voice filling the silence that had been his only companion for so long. 3 weeks into their marriage, Owen came in for supper to find Eleanor sitting at the table with a troubled expression, a letter in her hands. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately. She looked up, and he saw worry in her eyes. "I have received a letter from a friend in Sacramento. She writes that my former headmaster is telling people that I left under suspicious circumstances, that money went missing from the school funds while I was teaching there. He is ruining my reputation, Owen." Anger flared hot in Owen's chest. "That is a lie, a vindictive lie because you refused him." "Of course it is a lie," Eleanor said wearily. "But lies can be as damaging as truth, sometimes more so. If he spreads these rumors far enough, it could cause problems for us here. People might not want to associate with us, might not do business with you." Owen pulled out a chair and sat across from her, taking her hands. "Then we will face those problems together if they come. You are my wife, Eleanor. I know your character. Anyone who knows you would know these accusations are false." "You have faith in people that I do not share," Eleanor said, but she squeezed his hands. "Small towns love gossip, and scandal travels fast." As it turned out, Eleanor's concerns were not unfounded. 2 weeks later, when Owen went into town for supplies, he noticed a distinct coolness from several shopkeepers who had previously been friendly. The banker, with whom Owen had always had a cordial relationship, was brusque and dismissive. At the general store, 2 women stopped talking abruptly when he entered and moved away, whispering to each other. Pete, who had accompanied him on the supply run, noticed as well. "Something has got folks stirred up," the older man observed. "You have any idea what?" Owen explained about Eleanor's former headmaster and the false accusations. Pete's weathered face darkened. "That is dirty pool. Real dirty. What are you going to do about it?" "What can I do?" Owen replied, frustration evident in his voice. "The man is in Sacramento. I cannot prove he is spreading lies, and even if I could, confronting him would only make things worse." But the situation continued to deteriorate. Within another week, the minister's wife made a pointed comment to Eleanor after church services about the importance of honest dealing in all matters. 2 of the ranchers who Owen occasionally worked with on shared roundups found excuses not to participate that spring. Even the bank began sending notices about his loan payments, despite the fact that he had never been late with a payment. Eleanor bore the social ostracism with a stoic dignity that made Owen's heart ache. She held her head high in town and refused to respond to the whispered comments and cold shoulders. But he could see the hurt in her eyes, the way she withdrew into herself slightly. The easy companionship they had been building became strained under the weight of the community's disapproval. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch after supper, Eleanor spoke into the gathering darkness. "I am sorry, Owen. I have brought this trouble to you. Your reputation was solid before I came." "You have nothing to apologize for," Owen said firmly. "You have done nothing wrong. This is the work of a vindictive small man who cannot bear that a woman rejected him. Nevertheless, it affects you. Your business relationships, your standing in the community. Perhaps I should write to the school board in Sacramento, try to clear my name officially." "And you think they would believe you over their headmaster?" Owen shook his head. "No. We will weather this, Eleanor. Truth has a way of coming to light eventually." But Eleanor was not content to simply wait and hope. The next morning, after Owen left for the range, she hitched the wagon herself and drove into Jamestown. She went directly to the newspaper office, where the editor, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas Mackenzie, looked up from his typesetting in surprise. "Mrs. James," he said, his tone neutral. "What can I do for you? You can listen to the truth, Mr. Mackenzie," Eleanor said, closing the door behind her. "And then you can decide whether you are a journalist interested in facts or just another gossip interested in rumors." She spent the next hour telling him everything. About the headmaster's advances, about her refusal, about his retaliation, and the lies he was now spreading. She provided him with letters from former students and their parents praising her teaching, with her employment records showing she had left Sacramento in good standing before the accusations began. She spoke with calm precision, laying out the timeline and the evidence like the teacher she had been. Mackenzie listened, taking notes, asking sharp questions. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her. "You understand that printing this story could make things worse before they get better. It will draw more attention to the accusations." "I understand," Eleanor said. "But I will not live under a cloud of suspicion built on lies. My husband does not deserve to suffer for my past, and I will not let a bully destroy the life we are building together." The story ran in the Jamestown Gazette 3 days later, not as a salacious scandal, but as a sober account of workplace impropriety and false accusations. Mackenzie had done his own investigation, sending telegrams to Sacramento and receiving confirmation that no charges had ever been filed against Eleanor, that the missing money story had originated solely from the headmaster's office. He interviewed several local women about their own experiences with men in positions of power who expected certain favors, and their testimonies painted a damning picture of a common problem. The effect was not immediate, but it was powerful. Conversations began happening in parlors and at dinner tables. Women who had been among Eleanor's harshest critics began to reconsider. Men who had automatically dismissed the headmaster's accusations as truth started to question their own assumptions. The minister delivered a sermon on bearing false witness and the importance of charity in judgment. Owen knew nothing of Eleanor's actions until he picked up the newspaper at the post office and read the front-page story with growing amazement. He rode home faster than was probably safe and found Eleanor working in her garden, her hands covered in soil. "Why did you not tell me what you were planning?" he asked, not sure whether to be angry or proud. Eleanor sat back on her heels, pushing hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "Because you would have tried to talk me out of it or insisted on coming with me. This was my fight, Owen. My reputation to defend. You have done enough by standing beside me. I needed to stand up for myself." Owen dismounted and knelt beside her in the garden dirt, not caring that it would ruin his work pants. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said quietly, "and I am in awe of you." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "I am not brave. I was simply tired of being afraid." "That is what bravery is," Owen said. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Standing up even when you are afraid." Something shifted between them in that moment, some invisible wall crumbling. Eleanor leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. Not the polite, careful kisses they had shared before, but something deeper, more genuine. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I think," Eleanor said softly, "that I am beginning to love you, Owen James." Owen felt his heart expand in his chest, a sensation both painful and wonderful. "I know I am falling in love with you, Eleanor James. Somewhere between your terrible first attempts at making biscuits and watching you face down this town with such courage, I fell completely in love with you." They knelt there in the garden dirt, holding each other, and the summer sun beat down warm on their shoulders. When they finally went inside, leaving the garden work unfinished, they discovered each other in ways they had not yet explored, with tenderness and growing passion. and the house that had been empty for so long was filled with the sounds of life and love. The town's attitude shifted gradually over the following weeks. The bank stopped sending harassing notices. The ranchers invited Owen to participate in a cattle drive to the railroad at Stockton. Women began nodding to Eleanor at church and stopping to chat. It was not a complete vindication, and there were still those who held on to their suspicions, but the worst of the ostracism ended. In July, Eleanor announced that she was expecting a child. Owen received the news with such joy that he picked her up and spun her around, despite her laughing protests. They spent the evening making plans, discussing names, rearranging the spare bedroom to serve as a nursery. Boy or girl? Owen asked as they lay in bed that night, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I do not know," Eleanor said, "but I hope healthy regardless." "I hope he or she has your courage," Owen said, "and your kindness," Eleanor added. She turned to look at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I did not expect this, you know. When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security and partnership. I did not expect to find such happiness." "Neither did I," Owen admitted. "I thought I would spend my life alone, that the best I could hope for was companionship and someone to share the work. I never imagined I would find love like this." The summer passed in a haze of contentment and hard work. Owen brought in a good hay crop, and cattle prices were favorable. Eleanor thrived in her pregnancy, showing more energy than ever as she continued to improve the house and tend her garden. They worked together to build furniture for the nursery, with Owen cutting and joining the wood while Eleanor sanded and finished it. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the hills, making plans for their growing family. But their peace was shattered on a hot August afternoon when Pete came galloping up to the house, his horse lathered with sweat. Owen was helping Eleanor can tomatoes in the kitchen when they heard the urgent hoofbeats. "Boss, you better come quick," Pete called before Owen even made it to the door. "We have got trouble with rustlers. They hit the north pasture overnight, took at least 50 head. Owen felt cold fury wash through him. 50 head represented a significant portion of his herd, money they needed for the winter and for the baby coming. "Did you see which direction they drove them?" "North toward the high country," Pete said. "Tracks are clear enough. They have maybe 12 hours head start, but if we ride now, we might catch them before they get too far into the mountains." Owen turned to find Eleanor standing behind him, her face pale but composed. "Go," she said before he could speak. "We cannot afford to lose that many cattle." "But be careful, Owen, please." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I will be careful. I will be back as soon as I can. You stay near the house, keep the rifle loaded." "I know how to take care of myself," Eleanor reminded him, but her hands clutched his shirt. "Just come back to me." Owen rode out with Pete and 2 other hands, following the trail of the stolen cattle north into the foothills. The tracks were obvious, deep, and churned from the passage of many animals driven hard. They pushed their horses, stopping only briefly to rest and water them, gaining ground steadily on the slower-moving herd. They caught up with the rustlers the next afternoon in a narrow canyon about 20 miles from the ranch. There were 4 of them, rough-looking men with the hard eyes of those who lived outside the law. When they saw Owen and his men approaching, they drew their weapons. "Those are my cattle," Owen called out, keeping his hand near but not on his gun. "Let them go and ride out, and we will not have trouble." The leader of the rustlers, a heavy-set man with a scarred face, laughed. "I do not think so, rancher. We took these cows, that makes them ours now. You want them back, you will have to take them." Owen's mind raced. There were 4 of them and 4 rustlers, but these were hard men accustomed to violence. while Owen and his hands were ranchers who carried guns for predators and mercy killings. A gunfight would likely end with someone dead, possibly him, and then Eleanor would be alone with their child on the way. "What if we make a deal?" Owen proposed. "You keep 10 head for your trouble, I get the rest back, and everyone rides away alive." The rustlers conferred among themselves. The scarred leader finally nodded. 20 head, and you have got a deal." It galled Owen to let them steal even a single cow, but he thought of Eleanor waiting at home, of the baby coming, of all the reasons he had to stay alive. 20 head, he agreed. "Cut them out and get moving." The exchange was tense, both groups watching each other carefully, hands near weapons. But the rustlers took their 20 cattle and rode north, and Owen and his men turned the remaining 30 head back toward home. It took 2 days of hard driving to get them back to the ranch, and Owen was exhausted and filthy when he finally rode into the yard. Eleanor ran from the house, her relief visible. She threw her arms around him despite the dust and sweat, holding tight. "I was so worried. When you did not come back yesterday, I thought something terrible had happened." "We got most of them back," Owen said, holding her close. "Lost 20 head to the rustlers, but it could have been worse. It could have been much worse." That night, after he had bathed and eaten, they lay in bed and Owen told her everything. About the confrontation, about his decision to negotiate rather than fight, about the calculations he had made that valued his life over his pride. "I am not sure if I did the right thing," he admitted. "Some would say a man should fight for what is his, that letting them take any cattle was weakness." "Some would be fools," Eleanor said firmly. "You came home alive. That is all that matters to me. We can replace 20 cattle, Owen. I could not replace you." Her words warmed something deep inside him. "When I was facing those men, all I could think about was you and the baby, about everything I would miss if I died in some pointless shootout over livestock. It made the choice clear." "Good," Eleanor said, settling against his shoulder. "I married a practical man, not a fool seeking glory. I want my child to know their father." September brought cooler weather and the beginning of fall roundup. Owen worked long days gathering and sorting cattle, branding calves, cutting out the steers ready for market. Eleanor's pregnancy became more visible, her belly swelling beneath her dresses, and she moved with the careful grace of a woman carrying precious cargo. She still maintained the house and garden, though Owen insisted she leave the heavier work to him. On a crisp October morning, Owen was working in the barn when he heard a horse approaching. He stepped outside to see a woman on a fine bay mare, sitting side saddle in an expensive riding habit. She was perhaps 30 years old, handsome in a severe way, with auburn hair beneath a fashionable hat. "Mr. James?" she asked, reining in her horse. "I am Beatrice Whitmore. I own the property adjacent to yours to the east. I have been meaning to call and introduce myself to you and your wife." Owen had heard of Beatrice Whitmore, a wealthy widow who had inherited her husband's ranch 3 years prior and scandalized the county by choosing to run it herself rather than sell or remarry. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Whitmore. Would you like to come in? My wife is in the house." They found Eleanor in the kitchen, working on a complicated embroidery project for the baby's christening gown. She looked up in surprise at the visitor, immediately recognizing the quality of the woman's clothing and the confidence in her bearing. "Mrs. James," Beatrice said warmly, "I hope you will forgive my unannounced visit. I have been traveling and only recently heard that Owen had married. I wanted to welcome you to the area and extend an invitation to visit me when you are able. It can be lonely out here for women, and I have found that female friendship is particularly valuable in these rural circumstances." Eleanor's expression softened. "That is very kind of you, Mrs. Whitmore. Please sit down. I will make tea." The two women talked while Owen excused himself to return to his work, recognizing that Eleanor needed friends beyond just him. When Beatrice left 2 hours later, Eleanor came to find him in the barn, her eyes bright. "She invited me to join a reading group that she hosts once a month," Eleanor said excitedly. "Several of the ranch wives from the area attend. She is an extraordinary woman, Owen. She runs her entire operation herself, over 1,000 acres. The men may not like it, but they respect her." "I am glad you have found a friend," Owen said, pulling her close carefully, mindful of her growing belly. "You need more than just my company." Through Beatrice, Eleanor connected with other women in the county, forming friendships that enriched her life. Once a month, she drove into town for the reading group, and often women would stop by the ranch for visits. The house that had been so silent began to hear laughter and conversation beyond just Owen and Eleanor's voices. In late December, on a night when snow was falling softly outside, Eleanor went into labor. Owen had brought in the local midwife, Mrs. Patterson, that afternoon when Eleanor's pains had started, and now he paced the main room while she worked behind the closed bedroom door. The hours stretched endlessly, punctuated by Eleanor's cries that tore at his heart. Just before dawn, a baby's wail split the air and Owen stopped pacing, his heart hammering. Mrs. Patterson opened the door, smiling tiredly. "You have a son, Mr. James, strong and healthy." "Your wife did beautifully." Owen entered the bedroom to find Eleanor propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son's red, wrinkled face. "He is perfect," Owen whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with his finger. The baby's fingers curled around his, and Owen felt tears sting his eyes. "We made a person," Eleanor said wonderingly. "We made this beautiful person together." They named him Oliver, and he transformed their lives completely. The house was no longer quiet but filled with his cries and coos, with the sounds of Owen walking the floor at night trying to soothe him, with Eleanor's soft singing as she nursed him. Owen found himself rushing through his work to get back to the house, eager to hold his son and watch him sleep. Winter was harsh that year, with heavy snows that isolated them on the ranch for weeks at a time. But Owen did not mind the isolation now. His house was warm and full of love, and when the wind howled outside, he sat by the fire with Eleanor beside him and Oliver sleeping in his cradle, and he felt a contentment so complete it was almost painful. "You ever think about that advertisement?" Eleanor asked one evening in late January, while the snow piled up outside the windows. "About how strange it is that a few words in a newspaper brought us together." "I think about it often," Owen admitted. "I think about how close I came to not placing it, how I almost decided it was foolish to think any woman would respond. And then I think about how different my life would be now if I had not, and it terrifies me." "I think about nearly not responding," Eleanor said. "I wrote 3 drafts of my letter before I finally sent one. I was so afraid, Owen. Afraid you would not like me, afraid I was making a terrible mistake, afraid I was being foolish." "I am grateful for your courage," Owen said, reaching for her hand. "That first letter was the best thing that ever happened to me." "The second best," Eleanor corrected, nodding toward the cradle where Oliver slept. "He is the best thing." Spring came late in 1877, but when it finally arrived, the world seemed reborn. Owen's cattle had survived the winter well, and early calves were strong and healthy. Eleanor regained her strength and resumed her activities with renewed energy. Oliver grew rapidly, becoming more alert and responsive every day. In May, word reached Jamestown that the headmaster from Sacramento had been dismissed from his position, following an investigation into financial irregularities at the school. It seemed Eleanor's former colleague had indeed been stealing from school funds and had attempted to deflect suspicion by accusing Eleanor. The truth had finally emerged when other teachers came forward with their own stories of his misconduct. Eleanor received several letters of apology from people in Sacramento, including the school board chairman. She read them without much emotion, then set them aside. "That part of my life feels very far away now," she told Owen, "like it happened to a different person. I am not interested in vindication or apologies anymore. I have everything I want right here." But there was one piece of business Eleanor did want to complete. In June, she wrote a careful letter to the school board in Sacramento, requesting copies of her employment records and letters of recommendation reflecting her actual service. When they arrived a month later, she filed them carefully away. "For Oliver," she explained to Owen. "Someday I want him to understand what I did before I came here, who I was before I became his mother. I want him to know that women can have purpose and value beyond just being wives and mothers, even though I have found great fulfillment in those roles." The summer of 1877 was prosperous for the ranch. Cattle prices remained strong, and Owen was able to pay down a significant portion of his bank loan. He hired another hand to help with the work, which gave him more time to spend with his family. Eleanor's garden flourished, and she began selling eggs and butter in town, contributing her own earnings to their household funds. They talked about expanding the house, adding a proper parlor and more bedrooms for the children they hoped would follow Oliver. On their first wedding anniversary in late June, Owen surprised Eleanor by taking her into Sonora, the larger town 15 miles north of Jamestown, for a proper dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was the first time they had been away from Oliver, who was left in the capable care of Mrs. Patterson, and Eleanor was nervous the entire drive. "He will be fine," Owen assured her for the 10th time. "Mrs. Patterson has raised 6 children of her own. Oliver is in excellent hands." The restaurant was elegant by frontier standards with white tablecloths and proper china. Owen had saved for months to afford this extravagance, and he watched Eleanor's face light up as they were shown to their table. They ordered more courses than they could possibly eat and talked late into the evening about their year together. "I know this is not the life you probably dreamed of when you were young," Owen said over dessert. "Isolated on a ranch, working hard, no luxuries or society to speak of." "You are right, it is not what I dreamed of," Eleanor agreed. "My dreams were much smaller and sadder than this reality. I dreamed of survival, of security, of not being afraid. What we have built together exceeds my wildest hopes, Owen. I have love, purpose, family, a home that is truly mine. I have a partner who respects me and values my opinions. I have a beautiful son and the possibility of more children." What more could any woman want? Owen reached across the table and took her hand. "I love you, Eleanor, more than I knew it was possible to love another person. You have made my life complete in ways I did not even know were missing." "I love you too," Eleanor said softly, "so very much. Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger who answered your advertisement." "Thank you for answering," Owen replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." They drove home under a sky filled with stars, and when they arrived back at the ranch, they found Oliver sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Patterson's arms. The older woman smiled knowingly at their happy faces and quietly took her leave. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges, as all years do. In 1878, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, a placid baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with solemn eyes. In 1880, another son arrived, whom they called James after Owen's father. The house expanded with additions, growing from the simple rectangle into a rambling structure that accommodated their growing family. Owen's ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the more successful operations in the area. He and Eleanor worked together on every decision, partners in the truest sense. She proved to have a head for numbers and took over the bookkeeping, freeing Owen to focus on the physical work of ranching. They built a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock. The town that had once whispered about Eleanor fully accepted her, recognizing her worth and character. She became involved in establishing a proper school in Jamestown and served on the committee to hire teachers, making sure that they were protected from the kind of treatment she had endured. She remained close friends with Beatrice Whitmore, and the two women became known as formidable advocates for women's rights and education in the county. But beneath all the external success and activity, the foundation of everything was the love between Owen and Eleanor. It had started as practical arrangement, grown into genuine affection and respect, and deepened over the years into a profound bond that sustained them through difficulties and enhanced their joys. They still talked every evening, sharing the details of their days. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and passion in familiar touches. They still laughed together over the children's antics and supported each other through worries and fears. On a fall evening in 1885, 9 years after that first advertisement, Owen and Eleanor sat on their porch watching the sun set. Oliver was 14 now, already showing signs of the man he would become, working alongside his father on the ranch. Emma was 7, brilliant and curious, forever asking questions and reading every book she could find. James was 5, adventurous and fearless, keeping them all on their toes. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not placed that advertisement? Eleanor asked, leaning against Owen's shoulder. Sometimes, Owen admitted, though I cannot really imagine it anymore. This life, this family, feels inevitable now, like everything was always leading to you answering that letter. I think about the woman I was then, Eleanor said. So afraid and alone, so tired of fighting. She seems like a stranger now. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything would work out, that she would find happiness beyond her imagining. She had the courage to reach for it, Owen said. That is what mattered. You had the bravery to answer a stranger's advertisement, to travel to meet me, to build this life with me. That woman was not weak or defeated. She was strong. We both were, Eleanor corrected. You had the courage to admit you were lonely and needed companionship. How many men would have just accepted the isolation as their lot? You asked for what you needed, and that took real bravery. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, the sounds of their children playing inside the house drifting through the open windows. The ranch stretched around them, productive and peaceful, the result of years of hard work and dedication. The future spread ahead, full of possibilities and promise. I would do it again, Eleanor said suddenly. If I had to make the choice over, knowing nothing of what would come, I would still answer your advertisement. I would still take that leap of faith. Owen turned to look at her, this remarkable woman who had come into his life and transformed it completely. Her hair had threads of silver now, and lines had formed around her eyes, but to him she was as beautiful as she had been the day she stepped off that stage in Jamestown. More beautiful because he knew now the depths of her courage, intelligence, and love. And I would place it again, he said. I would send those words out into the world hoping they would somehow find you, because you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor James. She kissed him as the last light faded from the sky, and somewhere in the house their children laughed, and the ranch settled into evening quiet. The loneliness that had once defined Owen's existence was so distant now, it felt like something that had happened to another person. He had found not just companionship but love, not just a wife but a true partner, not just an end to isolation but a richness of life he had never imagined possible. All because he had been brave enough to admit his loneliness and post an advertisement for companionship, and because Eleanor Davies had been brave enough to answer. Years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. By 1890, Oliver was 19, a capable young man who had taken over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, allowing Owen to slow down slightly. Emma was 15, preparing to attend the new teachers' college that had opened in Sacramento, determined to follow in her mother's footsteps. James was 10, still young enough to believe the world held nothing but adventure. Owen and Eleanor were in their 40s now, no longer young but far from old, seasoned by life and deepened by shared experiences. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years and endured lean ones, raised their children with love and firm guidance, and built something lasting together. On a spring morning in 1891, Eleanor came into the barn where Owen was working and stood watching him for a long moment. He looked up from the harness he was mending and smiled at her, that same warm smile that still made her heart skip after 15 years of marriage. "You need something?" he asked. "Just you," Eleanor replied, coming to sit beside him on the hay bale. "I was thinking about how much has changed since I first came here. This barn has been expanded twice. The house has more rooms than I can count. We have 3 beautiful children and a successful ranch." "But you know what has not changed." "What?" Owen asked, setting aside his work. "The way I feel when I see you," Eleanor said softly. "That sense of home, of rightness, of being exactly where I belong. I felt it that first day when you met me at the stage depot, though I did not recognize it then. And I still feel it every single day." Owen pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "I know what you mean. Some part of me recognized you immediately, even though we were strangers, like my soul knew you before my mind did." They sat together in the quiet barn, dust motes dancing in the sunlight streaming through the door, the sounds of the ranch going on around them. It was an ordinary moment, one of thousands they had shared, and yet it was also profound. This was what they had built together. Not just a ranch or a family, but a love so deep and steady that it colored every moment of their lives. That evening, the entire family gathered for supper, a noisy, chaotic affair with everyone talking over each other, sharing stories of their day. Owen looked around the table at the faces of his wife and children, at the life they had created together, and felt such gratitude it threatened to overwhelm him. After the children had scattered to their various evening activities, Owen and Eleanor walked out to their favorite spot, a rise near the house that overlooked the ranch in all directions. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the spring grass rippled like water in the breeze. "You remember standing here the first day I brought you to the ranch?" Owen asked. "You said it was beautiful but isolated." "I remember," Eleanor said. "I was so nervous that day, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. The isolation seemed daunting. And now," Eleanor looked out over the land they had worked together, the home they had built, the life they had created. "Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else. This is not isolation. This is sanctuary. This is home." Owen wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and cattle lowed in the pastures. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, bright and steady. "Thank you," Owen said quietly, "for answering my advertisement, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who did not know how to ask for what he needed, for building this life with me, for loving me." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Thank you for placing that advertisement, for being brave enough to admit you were lonely, for being the kind of man worth taking a chance on, for making me happier than I ever dreamed possible, for loving me so well." They kissed as the sun disappeared, and the stars began to emerge. Two people who had started as strangers brought together by a simple advertisement and had built something extraordinary through love, hard work, and commitment. The ranch house glowed with lamplight behind them, full of the children they had raised and the life they continued to build together. The lonely rancher had asked for companionship, and Eleanor Davies had answered, bringing not just what he requested but so much more. She had brought intelligence, courage, partnership, and a capacity for love that had transformed both their lives. She had brought herself, fully and completely, and in doing so had made his world complete. And he had given her a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that sustained and fulfilled her in ways she had never imagined possible. Together they had built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love and family and perseverance that their children would carry forward. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance, Owen reflected that he had once thought happiness was impossible for him, that he would live out his days in solitary resignation. How wrong he had been! How grateful he was to have been wrong! The house welcomed them with warmth and light, and inside their children waited. Their life together stretched ahead, full of ordinary days made extraordinary by love. And it had all started with a lonely rancher who had dared to ask for companionship, and a brave woman who had dared to answer. It was more than enough. It was everything,